So let's bring in founding partner and Washington correspondent for the media venture Puck, Julia Ioffe. And Julia, you have a new piece for Puck entitled Never Again, Again, the history of Putin's terror, in which you write in part, quote, after Auschwitz, Europe said never again. Then the victors put on a trial of 24 Nazis, but most of the other perpetrators died peacefully in their beds. And yet never again has become in practice over and over and over again. If the world, as embodied by the United Nations, couldn't stop the vast slaughter of Syria, Rwanda, and Myanmar, what hope did the villagers of Bucha have? Bucha is just the beginning. The chances that the Russian soldiers who carried out the killings in Bucha or Irpin or Mariupol will see justice are slim at best. The only chance of them or their commanders ever facing justice is if Putin's regime completely disintegrates. The question is, what falls faster? Putin or the world order that America and the West have become accustomed to, the one into which Putin is taking a sledgehammer in Ukraine?
Well, Julia, I was going to ask if anything that you've seen over the past several weeks, if anything surprised you. You answer in your column, it has not. This is just more of the same for Putin.
Well, it's, it's a war, and things get incredibly ugly. And now we're seeing reports, and this is in no way to excuse what the Russians are doing, but they went into these small towns outside of Kiev. They got stuck. Their positions were obliterated, and they ran into basically partisan resistance from the Ukrainian civilians that they were sent to, quote unquote, liberate. And then it turned out they didn't want to be liberated. And in fact, they were fighting back and calling in their positions to people they knew in the Ukrainian army, who then took out these formations of Russian tanks and Russian soldiers. And, it looks like the Russians got crazy and desperate, and they got commands to be harsh. And what we're seeing is what happens when a war starts. And, once it starts, it's hard to figure out where it will go, other than, that things will get really bad, that people will become more and more savage toward each other, and the people with control will commit atrocities. It's what has always happened. And unfortunately, despite the infrastructure that the West put in place after World War II in order to prevent more wars like this and atrocities like this from happening, they keep happening over and over and over again, in part because countries like Russia and China and the U.S. are in the Security Council and have veto power and can get around pretty much anything and do what they want.
So let's talk about Russia, the indiscriminate bombing, the targeting of hospitals, one hospital after another hospital. They did the same thing in Syria. Of course, this morning you have people who are trying to evacuate from a region that's about to obviously see Russian troops and Ukrainian troops start fighting at each other. They target actually civilians who were trying to flee the area, not to call in anybody's position, and they deliberately target and kill civilians. Are you surprised by this, or is this the same thing that Putin did in Aleppo, the same thing he did in Chechnya?
That's exactly right. These are tactics that were honed and refined over 2 decades, first in Chechnya, but again, that was a republic inside Russia. It was a mostly Muslim republic. And because Putin was, according to many people in the West, was bringing order to a very chaotic Russia, was supposedly cleaning up corruption and going after the oligarchs, a lot of the West turned away, unfortunately. And most people didn't care. And there wasn't a lot of condemnation or efforts to stop Putin. Then again, in Syria, again, the West turned away, in part because it is a Muslim country, unfortunately. And Putin did a lot of the same things there, helping Bashar al-Assad claw back every inch of territory, no matter what, targeting aid convoys and hospitals. We've actually seen reports historically from the Soviets during the Finnish War in 1939. The Soviets targeted hospitals so frequently that the Finns decided to just wipe off any markings that showed that a building was a hospital, because they realized it actually made it more likely that Moscow would bomb them. So these tactics aren't new. And again, we have rules in place that were put in place after World War II, actually, and after World War I, to make sure these things didn't happen, that civilian infrastructure would be spared, that civilians would be spared, that hospitals would be spared. But again, Russia sits on the Security Council. Russia will not extradite any of its officials or officers or soldiers. So it knows that it can do this. It can violate international law with impunity. It can demonstrate how hollow Western institutions and laws and norms are. And there's little the West can do about it. And I feel like that's also part of the goal, not just to take over Ukraine, but to show the West that all of these things that it has built up, that it prides itself in, are nothing more than rhetoric.
Well, if that's a goal, it's a goal that is failing miserably for Vladimir Putin. You talk about Syria, and, you know, Mika, one of the things that for some reason people still don't focus on enough are the 2,500, 3,000 troops that David Ignatius went over to visit in Syria, the American troops that actually were making a difference there. And Trump yanked them out so he could turn Syria over, completely over to Vladimir Putin and Assad. And as far as what the Russians did, I mean, Julia brings up great historical perspective. It's what your father always talked about. And this isn't just about Vladimir Putin. This is about Russian history. And when you talk about Ukraine, well, Stalin starved, closed off the borders, starved 3 to 4 million Ukrainians in the early 1930s. And once again, hunger is being used as a weapon. Hey, thanks so much for watching our YouTube channel. You can follow up on today's top stories and breaking news, or catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.